Hi everyone, it's 7 p.m, so I think we're going to start this reading. My name's Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press. Obviously we're here to launch the Centenary Selected Poems of Edwin Morgan. It came out as a Carcanet Classic this July, so thank you all for being here to celebrate this book with us. We're going to hear from the editor of this book, Hamish White, and he will be joined by Liz Lochhead, David Kinloch and Diana Hendry. They're going to read some poems and they're also going to discuss Morgan's work, and they're going to discuss this new selection tonight. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for supporting indie poetry and publishing this year of all years. Some things to note before I hand over to Hamish. Now, obviously, you guys can't turn your cameras on. We can't see you, but you can see us. So if you could find the chat, it would be great to hear from you. Say hi to us. Let us know what you think of the reading. Let us know what you think of the poems and everything as we go through. That would be really cool. What's going to happen tonight is this event will probably last about 1 hour. In a minute or two, I'm going to hand over to Hamish. He's going to give a brief introduction to the poets who are reading tonight, and then he's going to have a little bit of an introductory discussion with Diana. They'll talk about the book and she's going to put some questions to him, and then we're going to jump straight into the readings. Now, while the readings are happening, I'm going to be showing the text on screen so that you can read along if you need to. What you need to know is that you're in control of your own screen. So the readers will still be visible on one side. If you would prefer to see them bigger than the text, you can double click on their faces, or you can resize the box by dragging the corners out. So you can configure it however you need to be able to read or to listen as you need to. After the readings, there's going to be an opportunity for some audience questions. So if you could find in the Zoom controls, either at the bottom of your screen or maybe the top, there's a button that says Q&A. If you could get your questions in there throughout the reading, that would be great, so that our readers can discuss them later on. And then Hamish is going to close up with one final poem. So I have already put in the chat the discount code. You'll get this in an email tomorrow as well, and I'll send it in chat later on for you again as well. So don't worry about that for now. Just sit back and enjoy the reading. That's enough from me. So I'm going to hand over to Hamish now, and we'll get going.
Yes, thank you, Jasmine. And everybody, welcome to the launch of the Centenary Selected Poems of Edwin Morgan. I was delighted to be asked by Michael Schmidt of Carcanet Press to edit this book for Eddie's centenary, and it's also the 10th anniversary of his death. The selection covers the whole of his published output of poems, from his first book in 1952, The Vision of Cathkin Braes, to his very last book in the year he died, 2010, Dreams and Other Nightmares. I mean, a huge writing life of 60 years. And with me to read poems from the book are, as Jasmine said, the poet and playwright Liz Lochhead, who succeeded Eddie Morgan both as Poet Laureate of Glasgow and as the Scots Macker, the National Poet of Scotland. Then David Kinloch, a poet, critic and emeritus professor of poetry at Strathclyde University and the current chair of the Edwin Morgan Trust. And to complete the quartet, there's my partner, the poet and award-winning children's author, Diana Hendry. And all four of us knew Eddie in one way or another as friends and as fans. But before we hear the poems, Diana, as Jasmine said, has some questions, or a question or two for me. So Diana.
Many weeks. The word that came into my head was sure-footed, and I was really surprised by this because I was expecting lots of angst and doubt and the wringing of hands and so forth, but it didn't happen. You seemed, well, the word was sure-footed. Could you say how that was, why it was?
Yes, I don't know about sure-footed, but you know, knowing the work fairly well and having read it time and time again over the years, I had a fairly clear idea of what I wanted to do. Certainly to base the selection on Eddie Morgan's own choice, his selected poems of 2000. And I assume that these were the poems that he wanted to be remembered by. So I would edit that a bit and build on it with a good selection from the incredibly prolific period of the last 15 years of his life. And also, one of the things I wanted to do was include poems from the new Divan sequence, which David is going to read from later. This was a sequence of poems very important to him, but it was very long and it never got into any of the selected poems. So probably for reasons of space. So that's the basis of it. Eddie's own selection plus ones I wanted to put in and thought would stand the test of time.
Did you have some new readers in mind?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean, I obviously have to include poems that fans, oldies like us, would look for, and also a few not so well-known ones. But I definitely had new readers in mind. I wanted to introduce them to the colossal variety of Eddie's work: love poems, concrete poems, sound poems, dramatic monologues, science fiction poems, history poems, poems of place, and much, much more.
Fine. One of the curious things that I thought was that you opened the selected with a Christmas poem, which seemed funny, starting with the end of the year with Christmas. Why did you choose that?
Well, it's the only poem I've included from his first book of poems. It's called Verses for a Christmas Card, and it indicates what was to come, I think. It's certainly a very playful poem. It shows his delight in language, his love of language generally, and also it shows the influence of Anglo-Saxon, which he had been studying not that long before at Glasgow University. And in some ways it prefigures the famous computer's first Christmas card. The selected poems comes full circle, as the last poem, which I'll be reading later, is actually a translation from Anglo-Saxon. So he kept that interest all through his life.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll go on to the readings now. I'm going to kick off the readings, and I'm going to read another Christmas poem, although before I do, I'll read a short, very slight poem. Both this poem and the Christmas poem come from the 1960s, from Eddie's breakthrough volume, The Second Life. And in the early 60s, Eddie discovered in himself the ability to write about anything and everything, that he continued to do all his life. So this poem is very slight. It's just a scene observed from a bus, but I think it's a key poem. It's an observation, but it's very human. It encompasses a very human experience. It's called Linoleum Chocolate. Two girls running, laughing, lugging 2 rolls of linoleum along London Road. A bar of chocolate flies from the pocket of the second, and a man picks it up for her. She takes it and is about to pocket it, but then unwraps it, and the girls have a bite to recruit the strength of their giggling progress. And Eddie was unapologetic in the way Americans are about place names and street names. You know, there's London Road, and this next poem has got Sucky Hall Street in it. Again, it's an observational poem, but it's more detailed and much deeper in its implications and so on. Trio. Coming up Buchanan Street, quickly, on a sharp winter evening, a young man and 2 girls under the Christmas lights. The young man carries a new guitar in his arms. The girl on the inside carries a very young baby, and the girl on the outside carries a chihuahua. And the three of them are laughing. Their breath rises in a cloud of happiness. And as they pass, the boy says, "Wait till he sees this butt." The chihuahua has a tiny Royal Stuart tartan coat, like a teapot holder. The baby in its white shawl is all bright eyes and mouth like favours in a fresh, sweet cake. The guitar swells out under its milky plastic cover, tied at the neck with silver tinsel tape and a brisk sprig of mistletoe. Orphean sprig, melting baby, warm chihuahua. The veil of tears is powerless before you. Whether Christ is born or is not born, you put paid to fate. It abdicates under the Christmas lights. Monsters of the year go blank, are scattered back, can't bear this march of three. And the three have passed, vanished in the crowd, yet not vanished, for in their arms they wind the life of men and beasts and music, laughter ringing them round like a guard at the end of this winter's day. And I'll finish my little group of poems with a poem from the other end of Eddie's life later on, the late 1990s. Written not long after he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer, and he was trying to come to terms with this. He spent a lot of time just walking about his house, the streets outside, and he happened to look up, and there on his window ledge was a seagull, and he wrote this poem. A gull. A seagull stood on my window ledge today, said nothing, but had a good look inside. That was a cold inspection, I can tell you. North winds, icebergs, flash of salt crashed through the glass without a sound. He shifted from leg to leg, swiveled his head. There was not a fish in the house, only me. Did he smell my flesh, that white one? Did he think I would soon open the window and scatter bread? Calculation in those eyes is quick. I tell you, my chick, there is food everywhere. He eyed my furniture, my plants, an apple. Perhaps he was a mutation, a super gull. Perhaps he was, instead, a visitation which only used that tight, firm, forward body to bring the waste and dread of open waters, foundered voyages, matchless predators into a dry room. I knew nothing. I moved an arm. When the thing saw the shadow of that, it suddenly flapped, scuttered claws along the sill, and was off, silent still. Who would be next for those eyes, I wondered, and were they ready and in order? Quite a powerful poem. And now on to Liz Lochhead, please.
I'm going to read one of Eddie's own favourite poems. I know that because I think he told me that once. And my friend Andrew Gregg, the poet, talked about how when he'd done a tour of Ireland with Eddie, that he changed his set most nights, but he always included this one. And Andrew said, you know, that this seemed to him, and I agree with him completely, that this seemed to be somehow, this poem about this man, Chingpa Valley, became a deep expression of aspects of himself and of his own inner life. Andrew Gregg says, I can still hear his voice and those quick, peppery rhythms, his delight. This is Cinque Valley. Cinque Valley is falling, falling. The shining trapeze kicks and flirts free. Solo performer at last. The sawdust pops up with a thump, settles on a tangle of broken limbs. St. Petersburg screams and leans. His pulse flickers with the gas jets. He lives. Cinque Valley has a therapy. In his hospital bed, in his hospital chair, he holds a ball lightly, lets it roll round his hand or grips it tight, gauging its weight and resistance, begins to balance it, to feel its life attached to his by will and knowledge. Invisible strings that only he can see. He throws it from hand to hand, always different, always the same, always different, always the same. His muscles learn to think. His arms grow very strong. Cinque Valley in sepia looks at me from an old postcard. Bundle of enigmas. Half fawn, half military man, almond eyes, curly hair, conventional moustache, tights, and a tunic loaded with embroideries, tassels, chains, fringes. Hand on hip, and with a large signet ring winking at the camera, but a bull neck and shoulders and a cannonball at his elbow as he stands by the posing pedestal. Half reluctant, half truculent, half handsome, half absurd. But let me see you forget him, not to be done. Cinque Valley is a juggler. In 1,000 theatres in every continent, he is the best, the greatest. After 8 years perfecting, he can balance one billiard ball on another billiard ball on top of a cue, on top of a third billiard ball in a wine glass held in his mouth. To those who say the balls are waxed or flattened, he patiently explains the trick will only work because the spheres are absolutely true. There is no deception in him. He is true. Cinque Valley is juggling with a bowler, a walking stick, a cigar, and a coin. Who foresees? How to please? The last time round, the bowler flies to his head, the stick sticks in his hand, the cigar jumps into his mouth, the coin lands on his foot, but is kicked into his eye and held there as the miraculous monocle, without which the portrait would be incomplete. Cinque Valley is practicing. He sits in his dressing room talking to some friends, at the same time writing a letter with one hand and with the other juggling 4 balls. His friends think of demons, but you could all do this, he says, sealing the letter with a billiard ball. Cinque Valley is on the high wire in Odessa. The roof cracks. He is falling into the audience. A woman breaks his fall. He cracks her like a flea, but lives. Cinque Valley broods in his armchair in Brixton Road. He reads in the paper about the shells whining at Passchendaele, imagines the mud and the dead. He goes to the window and wanders through the dark evening, wonders through that dark evening, what is happening in Poland, where he was born. His neighbours call him a German spy. Kessner, Paul Kessner, that's his name. Keep Kessner out of the British Music Hall. He frowns. It is cold. His fingers seem stiff and old. Cinque Valley tosses up a plate of soup and twirls it on his forefinger. Not a drop spills. He laughs, and well may he laugh who can do that. The astonished table breathe again. Laugh too. Think the world a spinning thing that spills for a moment, no drop. Cinque Valley's coffin sways through Brixton, only a month's only a few months before the armistice. Like some trick they cannot get off the ground, it seems to burden the shuffling bearers. All their arms cross-juggle that displaced person, that man of balance, of strength, of delights and marvels, in his unsteady box at last into the earth. Do excuse me. And I've got another one. It's a tiny little one, you'll be pleased to know, after the marathon that is the whole life of Cinque Valley. This is Eddie, once again, playful. He was always playful. In this poem, he's given a voice to something that doesn't normally have a voice. This is just the apple song. And I love this one because it's a lovely, sexy, funny wee poem about one of the most flirtatious cruising for a bruising apples going, I think. The apple song. Tap me with your finger, rub me with your sleeve, hold me, sniff me, peel me, curling round and round till I burst out white and cold from my tight red coat and tingle in your palm as if I'd melt and breathe. A living pomander waiting for the minute of joy when you lift me to your mouth and crush me, and in taste and fragrance I'll race through your head in my dizzy dissolve. I sit in the bowl in my cool corner and watch you as you pass, smoothing your apron. Are you thirsty yet? My eyes are shining. Thank you. And I want to listen to somebody else now.
Yes, David.
Okay, hello everybody, and congratulations, Hamish, on a splendid selection.
Absolutely.
I'm going to read a few poems from Eddie's long poem, The New Divan. This is a poem of roughly 100 stanzas, well, actually exactly 100 stanzas, 100 short stanzas. And I'm going to read a little from the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's a poem that is difficult to select from, and it's a poem that perhaps hasn't really had a very good press sometime. And the reasons for that are maybe worth talking a little bit about later. It's based loosely on, or was inspired loosely by the Divan of Hafiz of Shiraz, the 14th century Persian poet. And I think that Eddie was attracted both by the content of Hafiz's work, but also by the form. This is not a poem that has a straightforward narrative line through it. It's really a constellation of poems, and it's a kind of kaleidoscope of encounters and journeys through time and place. And although it's mainly set in the Middle East, where Morgan saw service during the Second World War, it sometimes shoots off northwards, westwards, and so place is pretty unstable in this poem as well. 1. Hafiz, old nightingale, what fires there have been in the groves, white dust, wretchedness. How could you ever get your song together? Someone stands by your tomb, thinks as a shadow thinks, much, little, any? You swore you'd be found shrouded in another gravecloth of pure smoke from a heart as burning dead as beating. But the names of cinders are thick where passions were. Whole cities could be ash. But not the song the Sufi says we have, but our dying song, you knew, gives us our beings. (26) To take without anxiety the love you think fate might have left for you is hard, when the brassy years without it have left an acid on the ease of purpose. The woman faltered, admitting it as she moved quickly to the window and looked out where sunlight leaped across the greenhouse glass. Breathless, she stood there, only to feel, to know, to see. Her dress was hot, a straitjacket. The light was noble. Nothing that was not past could ever be dull. She turned back from the dazzling silence and without a word ran into his arms. Outside, the green drank the sun's deep good. Number 56. I saw a face in the waterfall with ropey tears and great beard of glass, not steady, not vanishing either. The crashing hieroglyphic grew by what it was stripped of, like ants in armies. Rocks made eyes and mouth, but whose? There was no legend to tell us that. Only the hooting of faraway ships came up and crickets in the grass. Into the imagination, a procession of scenes hesitated, rejected by the melancholy of a frozen mile-off regard, signalling without sense from its shroud. '86. Not in King's regulations to be in love. Cosgrove I gave the flower to, joking, jumping down the rocky terraces above Sidon, my heart bursting as a village twilight spread its tent over us and promontories swam far below, through goat bells, into an unearthly red. He dribbled a ball through shrieking children, and they laughed at our bad Arabic and the flower. To tell the truth, he knew no more of what I felt than of tomorrow. Gallus, he cared little of that. I've not lost his photograph. Yesterday, tomorrow, he slumbers in a word. '99. I dreaded stretcher bearing. My fingers would slip on the two sweat-soaked handles, my muscles not used to the strain. The easiest trip of all I don't forget. In the desert, that dead officer, drained of blood, wasted away, leg amputated at the thigh, wrapped in a rough sheet, light as a child, rolling from side to side of the canvas, with a faint, terrible sound, as our feet stumbled through the sand. One of the other poems I'm going to read is one of Eddie's science fiction, so-called science fiction poems. This is called A Home in Space, and it's a poem in two parts. And we encounter figures familiar from many of Eddie's other science fiction poems, space travelers, interstellar travelers. And in this particular poem, the travelers leave Earth, shoot up into space, and then they take a very important decision to sever ties from Earth altogether. A home in space. Laid back in orbit, they found their minds. They found their minds were very clean and clear. Clear crystals in swarms outside were their fireflies and larks. Larks they were in liftoff, swallows in soaring. Soaring metal is flight and nest together. Together they must hatch. Hatches let the welders out. Out went the white suit riggers with frames as light as air. Air was millions under lock and key. Key-ins had computers wild on Saturday nights. Nights, days, months, years they lived in space. Space shone black in their eyes. Eyes, hands, foot tubes, screens, lenses, keys were one. One night or day or month or year, they all gathered at the panel and agreed to cut communication with the Earth base. And it must be said they were cool and clear as they dismantled the station and gave their capsules such power that they launched themselves outwards in an impeccable trajectory, that band of tranquil defiers, not to plant any home with roots, but to keep a voyaging generation voyaging, and as far as there would ever be a home in space, space that needs time and time that needs life. So that's a poem in two parts, 13 lines, and then it turns on the 14th line and it changes a little bit. Those dashes at the ends of the line maybe represent, are a kind of visual representation of that cutting of the ties to earth. But I think in that poem, Morgan is actually playing with the form of the sonnet. In a sense, he's stacking one sonnet or nearly sonnet on top of another, so that it resembles a kind of rocket that is going to blast off into space. And I think that kind of wit is absolutely typical of Morgan, showing the creaky, the old-fashioned form of the sonnet, perhaps, to this ultra-modern experiment as the rocket blasts into space. And that, I suppose, brings me to the final poem I'm going to read, which is one of the sonnets from Scotland. Eddie was constantly thinking about sonnet form. He was thinking about sonnets in the lead up to writing the new Divan. He was writing the Glasgow sonnets at the beginning of the 1970s. Then he wrote the new Divan. And when he finishes writing the new Divan, he moves into other sonnets, Jordanston sonnets, New Year sonnets. It's almost as if he's kind of building up to the writing of sonnets from Scotland. And this is one of my favorites. It's called Outward Bound. That was the time Scotland began to move. Scotland move? No, it's impossible. It became an island and was able to float in the Atlantic Lake and prove Cranog's no fable. Like a sea-washed log, it loved to tempt earnest geographers, duck down and dub them drunk hydrographers, shake itself dry, no longer log, but dog. Was it powered? On stilts? Amazing grace was found in granite. It moved on pure sound. Greenland twisted round to hear it. Key West whistled, waved. Lanzarote's ashy face cracked open with laughter. There was no ground of being, only being, sweetest and best. And that final line, I think, there was no ground of being, only being, sweetest and best, is a kind of key to the whole of Edwin Morgan's work, really. No ground, no roots, networks, constellations, being, sweetest and best. So I'm going to hand over now to Diana, I think, who's going to read for us now.
Thank you, David. I'm going to read two poems, and the first one is called Hyena. Eddie, I think, was a very gentle man, so it's an amazing imaginative feat to be able to speak in the voice and body, indeed, of a hyena. I don't think he ever actually met one, at least I hope he didn't. Anyway, it's a fantastic poem, and I greatly enjoy reading it. I am waiting for you. I have been travelling all morning through the bush and not eaten. I am lying at the edge of the bush on a dusty path that leads from the burnt-out kraal. I am panting. It is midday. I found no waterhole. I am very fierce without food, and although my eyes are screwed to slits against the sun, you must believe I am prepared to spring. What do you think of me? I have a rough coat like Africa. I am crafty with dark spots like the bush-tufted plains of Africa. I sprawl as a shaggy bundle of gathered energy like Africa sprawling in its waters. I trot, I lope, I slaver, I am a ranger. I hunch my shoulders, I eat the dead. Do you like my song? When the moon pours hard and cold on the veldt, I sing, and I am the slave of darkness. Over the stone walls and the mud walls and the ruined palaces and the owls, the moonlight falls. I sniff a broken drum. I bristle. My pelt is silver. I howl my song to the moon. Up it goes. Would you meet me there in the waste places? It is said I am a good match for a dead lion. I put my muzzle at his golden flanks and tear. He is my golden supper, but my tastes are easy. I have a crowd of fangs and I use them. Oh, and my tongue. Do you like me when it comes lolling out over my jaw, very long, and I am laughing? I am not laughing, but I am not snarling either, only panting in the sun, showing you what I grip carrion with. I am waiting for the foot to slide, for the heart to seize, for the leaping sinews to go slack, for the fight to the death to be fought to the death, for a glazing eye and the rumour of blood. I am crouching in my dark shadows till you are ready for me. My place is to pick you clean and leave your bones to the wind. Oh dear, oh dear. And the second poem I have to read is the Loch Ness Monster's Song. The story of the Loch Ness Monster's Song is that she popped her head up out of the loch looking for a mate. I usually only sing this to 14-year-olds or thereabouts who are very forgiving, and I hope you will be the same, for I'm not a natural monster speaker. So here we go. And waffle, and waffle, and waffle, and from huff. Gobble, bobble, hobble, gobble, gobble, glob, gob, 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 glob, gob. Half-labub, half gaff, gaff, ruff, ruff, ruff. Gum, groff, gruff, groff, off, grow, gum. Hobflapadock, doppladavock, blubberdock, doppelkadock, Sra, fock, fock, sprag, half, gravel, half, graff, half, fox, rock, scra, ca, gawk, fock, groff, groff, gaff, gumble, umble, blum, 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 blum. Great fun to do.
Thank you, Diana. I think we've got a great flavour of most aspects of Eddie's work. One important aspect of his work was his love poetry. He wrote many brilliant love poems, and each of us, I think, is going to read one of our favourites, one each, starting with Liz, please.
Well, they do say that what will be left of us is love, don't they? This is One Cigarette, one of Eddie's most famous, most glamorous love songs, I think. One Cigarette. No smoke without you, my fire. After you left, your cigarette glowed on in my ashtray and sent up a long thread of such quiet grey, I smiled to wonder who would believe its signal of so much love. One cigarette in the non-smoker's tray. As the last spire trembles up, a sudden draught blows it winding into my face. Is it smell? Is it taste? You are here again, and I am drunk on your tobacco lips. Out with the light. Let the smoke lie back in the dark till I hear the very ash sigh down among the flowers of brass. I'll breathe, and long past midnight, your last kiss.
This next one is called.
David? Yep.
This next one is called When You Go. When you go, if you go, and I should want to die, There's nothing I'd be saved by more than the time you fell asleep in my arms. In a trust so gentle, I let the darkening room drink up the evening, till rest or the new rain lightly roused you awake. I asked if you heard the rain in your dream, and half dreaming still, you only said, I love you.
Wow, that says it all.
And I think Diana is going to do the next one.
Next.
It was Hamish, no? Was it me?
Yes, I'm going to read Strawberries, which I think is probably Eddie's most famous love poem. Strawberries. There were never strawberries like the ones we had that sultry afternoon, sitting on the step of the open French window, facing each other, your knees held in mine, the blue plates in our laps, the strawberries glistening in the hot sunlight. We dipped them in sugar, looking at each other, not hurrying the feast for one to come. The empty plates laid on the stone together with the two forks crossed, and I bent towards you, sweet in that air, in my arms, abandoned like a child. From your eager mouth, the taste of strawberries. In my memory, lean back again. Let me love you. Let the sun beat on our forgetfulness. 1 hour of all the heat intense and summer lightning on the Kilpatrick hills. Let the storm wash the plates.
I think it's me next.
It is, yes.
Yes. This one is called In Glasgow, and it's such a lovely, sexy poem. In my smoochy corner, take me on a cloud. I'll wrap you round and lay you down in smoky tinfoil, rings and records, sheets of whiskey, and the moon all right, old pal, all right, the moon all night. Mercy for the rainy towers and the violet thunder that brings you shambling and shy from chains of Easterhouse, plains of lights. Make your delight in my nest, my spell, my arms and my shell, my barn, my bell. I've combed your hair and washed your feet and made you turn like a dark eel in my white bed till morning lights a silent cigarette. Throw on your shirt, I lie staring yet. Forget, forget. But who can forget Edward? Eddie.
There's a lot of forgetting in the poems, and memory as well. Yeah, interesting mixture. Love the lack of punctuation in these. That makes them not easy to read. And every time I read it or hear it read or see these poems, there's something new. I don't know if the others feel that way.
It's lovely to hear the voices.
Yes, it's great to hear them read.
It's fantastic. What a selection. And what an honour to have been part of this. I mean, there's a lot of people would have been given their eye teeth. And I must, join David in congratulating you so much in your choice. And what a hard job it must be, because, well, I mean, he did write so much, but you'd have a few representing each kind of category, but he did so many different kinds of things. Yes. And I think this reading has done that proud, but the book has as well. And what a lovely task to get to do the new selected poems.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Yes, a dream job. Favorite poems. I did have to leave out some of my favorite poems, I'm afraid, though I did put in some of my favorites. And I'm sure everybody will have their own selection. I'm sure there are poems that you would want to see there, Liz and David. But you know, you can't please everybody.
No. On a different day, you feel sometimes that you might pick a different one, I would imagine. You know.
One of my favourite poems is a poem about magpies. It's called A Defence. You know, we're not supposed to like magpies. They're bad birds. But Eddie came to their defence and wrote this fantastic poem. One long sentence, a study in black and white about magpies. And it's a tour de force. And I don't really know why I didn't put it in.
Just because there's not enough room.
No, I couldn't put everything in.
I can't remember how many pages you started off with, actually, Hamish.
Oh,
But
it was huge.
a couple of hundred more, I think, yes.
Well, I have to say that the design of the typesetter came back to me and said, "This book is obese." We had to slim it down a bit.
There's some questions come in the Q&A box. There's a question from Michael. There's one from Robin Marsack, and one from Vicky Husband. I don't know if everybody can actually see these questions or not. So I'll read out Michael's one, which is at the top of the list here. It was nice to have some less familiar Eddies read tonight and discussed. Are there two Eddies, the popular one whose anthology pieces are generally similar, the same, and the huge rest of him, in experimental, intellectual, in an unapologetic and good way, and not much has been made of the translations? So are there two Eddies? That's what we have to that's what we have to think about. For me, no, I don't think there is. Well, you could say that there are hundreds of Eddies.
Many Eddies, yes.
There are many Eddies. That would be one way to answer that question. But I tend to think that this is a bit of a cliche in a way. You know, when Morgan is thinking about concrete poetry, he's also thinking about the form of the long poem. What is it about the form of concrete that also makes him think about long poems, and are long poems actually possible in the 20th century? And when he's thinking about the new Divan and the stanzas of the new Divan, he's also thinking about the form of the sonnet, and whether it's possible to write a sonnet that can also capture the speeded up universe, as he once called it, of the 20th century. So I think he was constantly showing experiment to tradition and vice versa. He was incredibly ambitious for poetry in general, and he wanted to stretch all these old forms to breaking point, really. And just to see if they were actually, if they could fit, if they could match what he saw around him, and how he felt about the world, the contemporary world that he was living in.
Yes, Michael. No, Liz. No,
I was just going to see there's another question in Hamish, from Michael Schmidt, but he's saying that Robin Marsack asks, do you think Eddie enjoyed performing, and did he write with that in mind? I think he did. Well, I think the poems performed themselves to him when he wrote them, but what do you think? What does everybody else think?
I certainly think he enjoyed performing, although he was always nervous about performing, you know, right through his career, you know, even after having performed for years and years and years, he was always nervous before. And you talked about his peppery rhythms, and he had this wonderful, nervous way of performing. I'm not sure if he actually wrote with performing in mind, but I think because of the way he wrote, they were absolutely performable poems. So maybe deep down he was thinking like that.
I think probably all poets write with performing in mind. I mean, I'm just thinking of my own practice. You know, I'm constantly saying the poem out loud to myself as I write, and so really performance. You know, reading poetry at poetry readings is a kind of extension of that creative process. That's certainly true for me, and I'm sure it was probably true for him too.
He did a great deal in schools, didn't he? He must have enjoyed performing there to do as much as he did.
I don't know if he enjoyed it so much as felt duty bound to do it in a way. You know, but you know, he did it with great. He did it with great joy. He spoke so fast. In fact, I've got a funny wee story because I got given the job of reading aloud the Great Parliament poem, which and he rehearsed me he put me through my paces. I had to stand in the bathroom of his care home and you know, practice doing it, and it was supposed to be 4 minutes long. And I went home and I would try and do this in my house at 4 minutes, and I would never get it in 4 minutes time. And I was trying to speak as quickly as Eddie and get it right. And I read it out loud to my friend Siobhan Redmond over the phone, and she said, relax, make it make sense, give it a bit more room. She said, what are they going to do? You're going to be up on your feet. Okay, you're on after Nicola Benedetti or whatever. What are they going to do? They're not going to shoot you. Just keep going and do it. She said, you know, make it, if it takes 4 minutes 30 for you to do it, making sense, do that. You know, you're not in a competition with them. But I mean, he really did. He had great speed of mind and speed therefore of diction. And you know, sometimes there are real tongue twisters in the things that he wrote. And so if he was thinking of the performer, he wasn't giving the performer an easy time, I'll say that for him.
Yeah, look at the Loch Ness monster song.
Yes, that was wonderful, Diana. I loved the drowning end. What the drowning end rather than a dying fall, but it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Reading below the water.
Yes.
Michael says not much has been made of the translations, and I think the translating was all a part of Eddie as well. One of the many Eddies, and I mean, I would like to see a selected translations coming out. I mean, he felt they were almost on a par with writing his own poems. It was so important to him. And as I said earlier, I'll be finishing the session tonight with a translation by Eddie.
This I think too comes back to what I was saying about the connectedness of Morgan's work. If you think about the translations in relation to the science fiction poems, for example, you know, you go far away, you shoot up into space. Why? In order to understand yourself and your own culture and the nature of humanity more clearly. And the same, I think, can be said of the act of translation. You go abroad, you go far away, but perhaps, you know, at the end of the day, it's also to understand more about where you come from, whether that be Glasgow or Manchester or any place else.
Another form of travel, really.
Yes.
Yes,
He was incredibly modern. That's one of the things I think about Eddie. I mean, quite recently, along with Robin Marsack, you know, Eddie's friend, and like I am, but she was interviewing me for the Big Lit, kind of an online literary festival. It was one of the very first things I had to take out of my diary in March. It was going to be in April, but they've done a lot of stuff online, and it was much easier to talk about Eddie with somebody, you know, batting it back and forward. And one of the things that came up very strongly, and I felt that was one of the things that I had felt more, because I've been forced to think about him from that point of view, I think of him as being an old member of my generation rather than being the youngest one of the generation before. I think, you know, there's a famous painting, you know, Poets Pub, where there's McDermott, Sorley MacLean, Ian Crichton Smith, George Mackay Brown and Eddie are all in this pub, and Eddie's looking off to the side, and he's eccentric to that group in many ways. And he was very friendly with them, and, you know, read with them often. And he was only 10 years younger exactly than Norman MacCaig, but a very different kind of poet. And I felt that whenever we were starting to do poetry readings at the very end of the 1960s, this was not long after Eddie got out the wonderful book that you were so naughty about not taking many poems from. The Second Life was just bursting with poems that Eddie, you know, suddenly had come into his own in the end of the 60s, you know, in his 40s. And he seemed to really enjoy reading along with Tom Leonard, Ron Butlin, me, the generation below him. And, you know, he seemed like definitely the star and the kind of person traveling ahead for all of us. And I mean, going much further than any of us ever did. But, you know, so much of somebody modern and now, and, you know, just incredibly experimental, and making you feel guilty for not being very experimental yourself.
That possibly brings us to Vicky Husband's question.
Yes,
she says, David, you said you talk a bit more about the new Divan and its reception at the time. Well, it's a very long poem, and you know, we could be here for the next hour talking just about the new Divan itself. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the poem is the way that the war is presented, and in some ways, the way the war is not presented in that poem. It has the reputation of being Morgan's war poem, but it's a very, very belated war poem. You know, it doesn't get written until the 1970s, and it's not published until 1977. Why was Eddie not able to write about the war before that? Why is it that the explicit references to the Second World War only really appear in the last 20 or so poems in that very long sequence? These are all questions. I don't know whether I have necessarily the right answer to them, but one of the things I would say is that I think that Morgan felt that in a sense war was unspeakable and unwritable, and you know, war destroys human bodies, and the way that the human body is presented in the new Divan is very, very important. It's a source of, it's a locus of value, and the Second World War was about the crushing of human bodies, and the ability of human bodies to speak affectionately with love to each other, to one another.
And of course, Eddie, he wasn't a conscientious objector. He was thinking of becoming that, but he actually joined the ambulance corps.
Yes.
He was non-combatant. He was preserving life, and
yes, that's right. And there's that very moving stanza right at the very end of the poem where he evokes that soldier whose body is crushed and rolling from side to side like a child. It's very, very moving. All that emotion, it seems to me, is kind of pent up during the course of the long poem, and only really he only manages to articulate it in that explicit, moving way at the very end of this sequence of journeys, the series of travelogues through time and space.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm glad I've managed to represent some of that in the book. I think that's one of the worthwhile things of doing this. Could I wrap things up now just by saying I hope I've done Eddie justice in the book, covering the range of his work from love poems to science fiction and beyond. I've lived with Eddie's poems most of my adult life. Familiarity with them has bred only increased admiration and love for one of the most incredibly various and fascinating bodies of work in modern literature that I know of. And to finish, I'm going to read what was possibly the last poem he wrote, and published in 2010, the year he died. Translation from, I think it's one of the Exeter riddles, Anglo-Saxon, and he's just called it Riddle. Up beyond the universe and back, down to the tiniest sugar in the finger, I outstrip the moon in brightness. I outrun midsummer suns. I embrace the seas and other waters. I am fresh and green as the fields I form. I walk under hell. I fly over the heavens. I am the land. I am the ocean. I claim this honor. I claim its worth. I am what I claim. So, what is my name? The original answer was creation, but I think it should be Edwin Morgan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hamish and Eddie Morgan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your beautiful readings. Thank you for this wonderful new selection, Hamish. And thank you guys all for being here to celebrate this new book with us. It's been a real pleasure to hear you reading from it tonight. So yeah, huge thank you to everybody involved. As I said earlier, you guys obviously paid to be here. We really appreciate that. So you will get a discount code to buy a copy of the book. Please do buy a copy of the book. That would be great. I've put the link in the chat for you and the details for the discount code, but you'll get it as an email tomorrow as well. So check your inbox. If it doesn't come, then please get in touch with me. I'm here and I can help you out with that. So the last thing for me to say is we have another launch coming up next week. Please join us to launch John Glover's Birdsong on Mars. We'll be launching that with Rebecca Goss and John Whale. That's at the same time, 7 p.m. on Wednesday. Excuse me. And the final thing for me to say is we will be uploading the first video from one of our online launches to our YouTube channel on Friday. So you'll be able to watch for free Matthew Welton's launch of Squid Squad from back in May. It's taken us a while, but you'll be able to watch that for free. And there's loads more coming. So sign up to our newsletter and follow us on social media if you don't already to find out about that. So that's everything from us. Thank you so much once again. And well done, Hamish, on this excellent new book.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go now, but I'm gonna just leave everything open for a minute so you guys can get any last minute messages into the chat. But thank you all very much.